The Warriors are starting to enter the twilight stage of Steph Curry's career. He's going into year 17, and by the time the playoffs roll around, he'll be 38 years old. Yet, because he's still one of the best players on the planet, there's a sliver of a window to contend. So what can we expect from them in 2026, and are they good enough to win a championship? The Warriors had maybe the most interesting 2025 season of any team. They finished with about an average offense, the number 7 defense, and won 48 games on their way to a playoff spot where they knocked off the 2-seeded Rockets. But those markers probably don't do them justice because it really was a tale of 2 seasons for the Dubs. They traded for Jimmy Butler in February, and from that point on, everything shifted. Over the final 31 games, they had the 3rd best record and net rating in the league behind just the Thunder and the Celtics. And during the stretch, they were great on both sides of the ball, having a top 10 offense and the number 1 defense. That top defense was primarily the result of pairing Jimmy and Draymond, maybe the 2 smartest defenders in the league, and allowing them to freely roam behind the play to just blow up everything for opposing offenses. But they also had Moses Moody emerging as a really good defensive wing, they still had Gary Payton II stashed on the bench, and they had smart team defenders in Steph, Podziemski, and Looney. This was on full display in the first round against Houston. At times, they were overwhelmed by the Rockets' size, but they implemented an aggressive style of help that allowed them to completely shut down perimeter isolations, take away the rim, and force Houston's creators into tough spots. Then on offense, Jimmy not only was a perfect fit in the motion between his screening, passing, and cutting, he still provided just enough juice as an isolation creator to fix Golden State's biggest issue. What I'm referring to is the way the offense completely collapsed whenever Steph went to the bench. And by having Jimmy run those units, you had 48 minutes of quality offense in addition to the suffocating defense. The roster didn't have a ton of two-way depth, but they did have options depending on what they needed. For physicality and rebounding, Looney was an option. If they needed more spacing, rookie Quentin Post was an option. If they needed more scoring, Buddy Hield could step in, and if they needed more defense, they could throw GP2 on the ball. All that mattered was the core 3. Any combination of Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond had such a nice balance of offense and defense that they'd produce amazing results regardless of who filled those last 2 spots. Unfortunately, we never got to see the full extent of how good this team was because Steph got hurt early in game 1 of the second round. So now the question moving forward is just how sustainable was that run with Jimmy? Before we get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to Factor for sponsoring this video because this 31-day series wouldn't be possible without them. Between the time it takes to research each team and produce these videos while balancing my personal life, I just don't have time to cook for myself. With Factor, in just a matter of 2 minutes, I can get a fully prepared meal on the table without worrying about preparation, cooking, or cleaning up. Just simply unbox, heat it up, and enjoy. The meals are fresh, never frozen, and there's a ton of variety. Recently, they've doubled the size of their menu to 80 plus rotating weekly meals. So whether you're craving a steak, a chicken breast, a calorie smart, or vegan option, Factor's got you covered. For me personally, it's bulk season, so I've been loving their protein plus options. And eating clean has never been easier for me since signing up for Factor, which is why I'm super excited to bring you guys a special offer. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code HoopVenueFB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for a year. You heard that right, that's code HoopVenueFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for a year. Beyond the scoring, playmaking, and ability to take pressure off of Steph, Jimmy has a unique impact on the game that basically no other player can replicate. A theme with great teams, especially in the playoffs, is how much they value possessions. There's no better way to ensure that you outscore your opponent than if you're simply getting more chances to score. The Rockets infamously dominated the possession game through their offensive rebounding. Over the course of 82 games, they averaged 5.5 more true shot attempts than their opponents, which essentially means they had 5.5 more chances to score. Another way to maximize possessions is by not turning the ball over, making sure you get a shot on as many plays as possible. And on the inverse, you can force turnovers on defense, taking shots away from the opponent. OKC excelled in both of these areas, and as a result, they were second behind the Rockets, getting about 4 more chances to score than their opponents. I say all this because Jimmy's maybe the best offensive rebounding wing in the league. He's also a primary scoring option who handles the ball a lot without turning it over, while picking up tons of steals and deflections on defense. This allows him to single-handedly alter the possession game to an extreme degree. Each team he's been on since 2020 has had more chances to score than their opponent with him on the floor. And with him on the bench, they've consistently fallen off a cliff outside of a blip in 2024. We're talking a difference of 4 or more opportunities to score just by simply checking him into the game. You'll notice that the Warriors were already a good team in this regard. Well, the addition of Jimmy put them among the best, rivaling Houston at almost 5.5 more opportunities to score over those last 31 games. So that aspect of the Warriors is 100% sustainable. They're going to continue to force a ton of turnovers. They should take decent care of the ball in offense. The only thing I'm slightly worried about is that over the offseason they lost Kevon Looney, so unless they're planning to play Trace Jackson Davis big big minutes, they're probably losing a lot of those second chance opportunities. Another big impact Jimmy has on the team is the free throw rate. He's amazing at using his body to draw fouls, which arguably made an even bigger difference in Golden State than everything else I've talked about. Before the trade, they had the 5th lowest free throw rate in the league. After the trade, they had the number 1 free throw rate, and he shoots in the mid 80s on those, so we're talking an extra 4 or 5 points a game. Along with the obvious defensive synergy between him and Draymond, that should only grow. Unless there's some serious athletic regression to a member of the Big Three, they'll pick up right where they left off. From there, it was all about retooling over the offseason to reach an even higher level. Only they were robbed of a normal summer because of the giant question mark that was Jonathan Kuminga. After about 3 months of negotiations that featured everything from trade talks to multiple offers and tons of media noise, the Warriors finally brought him back on a 2-year deal. Even now though, we have no idea what to expect. Is he gonna play serious minutes? Is he gonna be traded? Can he fit into any of their go-to lineups? Because the thing with Kuminga is that he obviously has a ton of talent and a legitimate superpower. He just turned 23 years old and is already one of the better interior scorers in the league, using his size, athleticism, and skill to get to the rim efficiently and generate tons of free throws. What's interesting is that half-court slashing is one of the only weak points with this team, especially when Jimmy's on the bench, so you'd think he's the missing piece. However, it's everything else that prevents him from getting serious playing time, like inconsistent defense, oftentimes poor decision-making or vision on offense, and maybe most importantly, the lack of a consistent outside shot. There just aren't any positive shooting indicators working in his favor, ranking among the worst in the league from each spot and really only taking threes when the defense concedes them. The reason this is so awkward is because Jimmy and Draymond play almost all of their minutes together. When Steph goes to the bench, those two stay in with the second unit, and if you slot Kuminga alongside them, the spacing in the front court just isn't going to cut it. Well, come playoff time, those guys are probably going to be playing 35 or 36 minutes a game, which means in order to get Kuminga on the court, you'd either have to sacrifice that duo or just play him in the other 12. All that's to say, I'm really not sure what to expect regarding Kuminga. But what I do know is that once that saga was over, they immediately brought in Al Horford. I can't even begin to describe how good of a fit Horford is with the Warriors. Like I said, Jimmy and Dre play most of their minutes together, and neither of them really space to the three-point line. So you want to surround them with as much shooting as possible. One option is to simply run Dre at the 5, only that gives up lots of size, especially when they're running a smaller backcourt. Ideally, you want to stretch 5 who can protect the rim, and last year that was rookie Quentin Post. In the regular season and playoffs combined, that duo played over 1,000 minutes together. When Draymond played the 5, they outscored opponents by almost 6 points. When Post played the 5, that number jumped up to 12. What's even crazier is what happens when you take Steph out of the equation. The duo played 432 minutes without him, and with Dre at the 5, they were basically playing teams to a stalemate. With Post at the 5, they absolutely dominated, posting a plus 17.5 net rating. Obviously, these aren't the biggest samples in the world, but I think there's a clear signal that good things happen when you surround Jimmy and Draymond with size and space. Post in particular had serious limitations though. On offense, basically his only job ever was to stand there and make threes. 65% of his shots came from behind the arc, so he didn't really do much of anything in the paint. Then on defense, he seriously lacked the foot speed to defend pick and roll, or really stick with any individual matchup who was even slightly mobile. However, he was a legit 7-footer who was active and could help at the rim. So just by simply being big and making his open threes, he had a huge impact. Well, Horford has all of that and so much more. Over the last 3 seasons, he's been maybe the best volume catch and shoot big in the league, hitting 41% of those opportunities. He's also a really good passer, and we know how the Warriors love to use their bigs as initiators either up top or in the pinch post with their classic split action. It's the defense I'm most intrigued by. Even at age 39, he can still switch across the board with ease. He can execute every coverage against pick and roll, he's active, always in the right spot, and can protect the rim. So in a front court next to Jimmy and Draymond, we're talking about near flawless versatility. There's nothing they can't do from a schematic standpoint, and they're also all geniuses. Which is actually something I want to highlight because they're the smartest defensive team in basketball, and I'm not sure it's close. Beyond those 3, Podziemski's an incredibly smart defender who's always in the right spot. Steph's also an incredibly smart defender who's always in the right spot and is a loud communicator. Overall, I think we're looking at one of the smartest teams in NBA history. Old age is both a blessing and a curse. I'm not sure how they'll hold up physically, but there's a ton of value in having seen tons of different looks, knowing how to adjust, and what it takes deep in the playoffs. Across the board, their depth chart is stacked defensively. They brought back DeAnthony Melton and Gary Payton II, Moses Moody turned himself into a very strong wing defender, and they still have Post or Trace Jackson Davis for added size if they need it. And Trace could be important because one defensive weak point you could point to with all 3 of Draymond, Horford, and Post is that none can really rebound at a high level. Another potential problem with the rotation is a lack of reliable offensive depth. They've got some shooters, but how many of them can be relied on to create or play heavy playoff minutes? We're talking about small gripes on an otherwise really good roster. IQ and versatility can take you a long way in the playoffs, especially when you have an offense structured around Steph Curry, a few other great shooters, and another capable 20-point per game scorer. Unless Kuminga plays serious minutes, I do think the team lacks rim pressure, which could make the offense a little bit predictable come playoff time. And I'm not 100% sure what to make of the fact that they're extremely old. For that reason, I think they'll take somewhat of a backseat in the regular season, prioritizing health over anything else. Because they check so many boxes, that still puts them in a good spot to win 50 or more games though. Come playoff time, I really do think this team has enough to win a championship if everything goes right. But I could just as easily see them going out in the first round with how stacked the West is. Will they find a way to integrate Jonathan Kuminga, or will he be traded before the deadline? Will the old age of Steph, Jimmy, Draymond, and Horford prove to be too much to make it through 82 games and 4 playoff rounds? Only time will tell. But one thing I do feel confident saying is that we're about to witness the best Warriors team since their title in 2022.